Good afternoon. This is Ann Desaro.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. This is Ann Desaro from the New York State Coalition for the Aging, which is pleased to collaborate today with the New York State Association of Area Agencies on Aging to present our second part of our fall webinar series on professional development. We're going to talk about change management today, which is certainly very timely. In today's service delivery environment, change is now the new norm for those in leadership roles and also for our workers in the field. This is clearly evident in the sweeping changes that are coming about as a result of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act and the redesign of how Medicare provides long-term care services. What we're going to explore today is the nature of both planned changes and changes that are imposed by others and how we manage that for the best outcome. This session will be recorded and will be available with the slides after the session is over on the New York State Association of Area Agencies website. Which I'll give you that website when we close at the end of the session. We're very fortunate today to have, actually for the entire four webinar series, we have been working with the Professional Care Management Institute, which is an organization in Pennsylvania that has extensive history of working with not-for-profit organizations, particularly those, and government organizations, particularly those working in the field of aging. So we have experts from that organization presenting all of our four fall webinar series. And today our leader of this session is Brad Levan, who is the Executive Director of the Professional Care Management Institute. He has worked in the field of human services, holding positions in aging, drug education and prevention, remediation, and for adjudicated delinquents, doing counseling and preschool daycare for over 20 years. This has helped him well as he's provided service to other agencies, including consultation, planning, problem solving, program evaluation, training, and curriculum development. So his background well suits him for helping us look at navigating in uncertain times. So I would like to welcome Brad and get us started on our webinar. We will stop for questions in the middle of the webinar, and we encourage you to use the questions box and write your questions, and I will read them to Brad and he can answer them. So you can do your questions as the session goes along, and then we will have time for questions again at the end of the webinar. So thank you very much. Brad?
Well, thank you for the introduction, Ann. It certainly is a privilege to be here today. When I was first asked to consider doing this presentation, I spent some time trying to think about what might I be able to offer that would be valuable to folks in New York. And I wanted to take just a few minutes to share with you what I think I can offer based on my experience. I've been very fortunate that I was able to do my graduate work at Lincoln University, and I think I was fortunate because they're basically in the business of training people to be change agents. And they do this both at the individual level, the group level, agency, and societal level. Since my graduation there, which was well over 2 decades ago, actually getting close to 3 now, I've started to teach there as well. And one of the nice things about teaching there is I have 90 new students each year. All of these students are currently working in human services, and they're from all along the eastern seaboard. We have people from New York City, from Washington, D.C., from Baltimore, from Harrisburg, from Pittsburgh, from Philadelphia. It's quite a range of students. And I get a chance to see how these concepts and ideas play out in their workplaces. Finally, I've had over 25 years of experience in working with the Aging Network in Pennsylvania. And as a result of that, let me see if I can get rid of this box. As a result of that, we've got a screen that froze here. Let's see if I can get this fixed. All right, I hope we're back on track now. Yeah, thank you. As a result of that experience in Pennsylvania, I've had an opportunity to think about what specific kinds of concepts would be applicable to the aging network in New York. I want to share a few of those things historically. Pennsylvania was a little bit late to the party, but at one point we decided, yes, we needed waiver dollars to unlock funds to serve community-based Braille elderly. Prior to that, we weren't using waiver dollars. We were using just money from the Commonwealth and income from different sources in that way. But changing the waiver really kind of opened a pathway that we've been on since then. At one point, we had two different types of funding streams for our care managers in Pennsylvania. One we called options, and the other was those programs funded by waiver. And at one point, it was decided that we should integrate those two. That is, there shouldn't be separate care managers in each program. Rather, each care manager should be able to deal with consumers regardless of where the funding came from. And this actually created quite a bit of stress on the workers in terms of, can I manage all of these different kind of requirements? Will we be able to develop a way to document things that work in both systems? And fortunately, the answer to those questions was yes, that could happen. Somewhat later, there was another traumatic change that occurred. In Pennsylvania, assessment was something that was typically subcontracted. That is, the AAAs found other agencies more regionally located that would do the assessment before care management and care planning could actually take place. Well, at one point it was determined that this should be brought in-house and it should be centralized. As you can imagine, the subcontract agencies were somewhat traumatized by this. For many of them, this was a major source of income. So this was another bump in the road that we had to overcome. We also put into effect cost sharing at one point, where there was a standardized sliding co-payment scale, not for waiver programs, obviously, but just for our option services. And what was interesting about this is that we had developed I shouldn't say we had, our consumers had developed a sense of entitlement where they didn't necessarily see co-payment as something that was desirable. So our system had to figure out how do we make this transition and make this something that will actually work. More recently, there was the creation of the Office of Long-Term Living, and the term living itself is indicative of some of the changes that were taking place. Prior to that, it was long-term care. But one of the things that happened when we decided to use waiver dollars is that there became a growing interest in having consistency between the different types of waiver programs. So that meant that waiver programs that dealt with people who were under 60 were now being managed at the state level, or at least looked at the state level, by the same people who were looking at programs for folks over 60s. So the creation of this office was seen as a bridge between the Pennsylvania Department of Aging and the Pennsylvania Department of Public Welfare. There was some concern, and I think there are still those who hold this to be so, that it wasn't so much a bridge as it was a demoting of the Pennsylvania Department of Aging in terms of its status within the Commonwealth. Most recently, we've had Act 22 in 2011, and this eliminated care management. In effect, with Act 22, the system now shifted so that all service coordinators took over the place of care managers. That is, we were now using a model that was typically used in the under 60 waiver programs, and we were using it for the over 60 programs as well. And this has had a tremendous impact on area agencies on aging, to the extent that there are some AAAs right now who are actually making the decision not to do any waiver work in the future because they don't believe that they can sustain it with the type of reimbursements that are currently there. So this is one that the dust hasn't settled on yet here in Pennsylvania. In terms of our experience here at PCMI, we've been very fortunate that we were asked to sit at the table for a major project that brought disability and aging together. And one of the things that happened is there was an effort at the state saying we need to bring consistency in terms of how we train people who are using waiver dollars. So there was the development of an online curriculum by Boston University's Institute of Geriatric Social Work. And they basically brought people together from the Aging Network and the Disability Network to help design a single curriculum that could be used to train new workers in both of these networks. And this was the first time that people from these two disciplines were brought together for a dedicated project that took 2 years to unfold. That gave us a chance to really see how folks from different systems interacted with one another and what some of the issues were, what some of the boundary issues were, what some of the challenges were that people were facing. At the same time, PCMI was fortunate that we were given a contract to develop a Train the Trainer curriculum, and this was a curriculum that would follow the online training that people received, and it would be face-to-face training. So our job was to develop a curriculum that would train people throughout the Commonwealth to do this face-to-face training with folks from disability and aging in the same room. In order to do this, we did focus groups across the Commonwealth, and I can tell you from those focus groups, we learned an awful lot about how different agencies view change and how they manage change. Last but not least with this, we've had the opportunity to do 3 rounds of training with this particular program. And I can tell you that when we get people from disability and aging in the same room, we go through a period of time where there is some resistance, there is some territorial kind of squabbling, but ultimately they come to see that they have more in common than they do in terms of having differences. So these are some of the experiences that I'm going to draw upon today as I make my presentation. And I want to focus today on just a handful of things. I want to talk a little bit about the environment in which change occurs, because it's different now than it was when I first came into human services. I want to talk about the nature of change itself, what we can anticipate, what we can expect. I'd like to spend some time talking about the importance of knowing your distinctive competence. What is it that's at the core of what you do and what you do well? The fourth thing I'd like to look at is the search for meaning. As I've worked with people who are going through change episodes, this issue of meaning is one that arises over and over again. So we're going to spend some time taking a look at that on several different levels. And last but not least, in large part from my most recent experiences, we're going to talk about the importance of building bridges and not fences. Before we get into the content, however, I'd like to give you 2 quotes to think about. The first one from Albert Einstein I really like a lot. The world as we have created it is a process of our thinking. It cannot be changed without changing our thinking. And I think this is just so true. To me, this says that if we're dealing with change, one of the things that has to happen in order for us to be successful is that we must change the way that we think about things. We tend to create mental maps of the world, and we tend to project those mental maps on others and ourselves. And unless we're willing to adjust those maps and change our thinking, it's going to be very difficult to successfully navigate change. The second quote is going to be a lead-in to our first part, actually, and that is the rate of change isn't going to slow down anytime soon. One of the ways I wanted to approach the changing environment was to draw on the work of Peter Vail. As I thought about what's the best way to get at this, his work came to mind. Now, Peter is an internationally known and respected management consultant. And if you get a chance to read some of his stuff, I would encourage you to start with this book, Learning as a Way of Being. And what I've done is I've taken his work and I've tried to illustrate it a little bit. If you look on the left side, you'll see a canoe that's in relatively calm, serene setting, and people are taking in the sights. And yes, they've got their life jackets on just to be safe, but there's really no rush, there's no hurry. They can take their time and kind of enjoy things. Well, Peter argues that change in the past could be dealt with from this kind of position, that we really didn't need to rush, we really didn't need to hurry. Things were going to move at a leisurely enough pace that we could really take our time and plan. We could reflect on things before we had to actually make decisions. Today, however, we're really more in the territory that you see on the right. And what we have on the right is a raft that's going down white water, rapids. White water gets its name because it's moving so quickly and churning so much that it actually starts to look white. And when you're going down white water rafting, there's a couple things that happen. One is that you're moving extremely fast. Things are coming at you very, very fast. You're going to get wet. There's no way to do this without getting wet. The other thing that happens, though, is that you don't have the same luxury of time that you do when you're in calmer, more serene water. And part of what Peter argues today is that we're in permanent white water, that things have accelerated so quickly that it's very rare that we'll see that serene kind of setting on the left. We're going to be spending most of our time in permanent white water. And that means not only do I want my life jacket on, I want my helmet on as well. And I want to make sure the people who are in the raft with me know what they're doing. It's critical that I have the right people with me because they're all going to have jobs to perform, a function to fulfill. Peter says there are several qualities or characteristics of white water that I think are really important for us to look at. One is that this type of change has an element of surprise in it. There are things that we just didn't see coming. And that's true when you're going down in white water. You can look as far ahead as you want and there'll be things submerged that you just simply won't see until you're right on top of them. The second is that managing change in this way means we have to be prepared for the new or the novel. We'll be in territory and we'll be seeing things that we don't typically see. The third thing is that what we're going to confront won't neatly fit into what we already do. It won't fit into our already established skill set in a very neat, tidy package. I think the fourth thing is that it can't be brushed aside or ignored. We can't pretend that it doesn't exist. That's just entirely too dangerous if we try to do that. And the fifth thing is that we really can't anticipate everything that's going to happen. And there are some things because of this that we simply cannot plan for. So that means that we're going to have to think on our feet. We're going to have to be prepared to get wet at times because we just simply won't be able to plan for everything. There is a second element to the current environment with change that goes beyond the speed with which change occurs and how chaotic it can be. And that is the complexity of change. And as I thought about this, I thought, well, I can illustrate this by using two maps of the internet that are just a year apart. And the map on the left was at the start of the year. And if you take a look at this map, you'll see that there are many, many hundreds of thousands of connections. There are hundreds and thousands of endpoints and starting points. It's a fairly complicated, sophisticated map. Yet if you look at the one on the right a year later, you'll see that it's gotten incredibly dense. The connections, the endpoints, the start points, the possible routes have just exploded. Now we're in the millions and millions of possibility. What's really scary about these two maps is these are maps that were actually taken from 1999. So you can imagine just how dense and how complicated the new maps are. Well, when we're dealing with change today, we're really in the map on the right, the more complex one. And that means that there are some good things that are going to happen, and there are some other things that we really need to pay attention to. One of the good things is really related to the concept of equifinality, which simply means there's numerous ways to the same end. So if I want to go from point A to point B, I've got more choices in terms of how to do that with this level of complexity. I may have to take detours. I may have to go to point F and then come back to point B. But the advantage is that there's a lot more opportunity with this level of complexity. One of the major challenges with this level of complexity is making sure that you know where it is that you want to go, because it's very, very easy to get lost when things are this dense and complex. The reality is that New York has a changing landscape, and I think Neil Lane in his white paper, The Changing Landscape of New York's Long-Term Services and Supports, Implications for the Aging Service Network, he did a really good job of looking downstream to take a look at what's coming up in this white water we're in now. And he's identified just many more things than I have on this slide. These four are just indicative of some of the changes. Yes, there will be a redesign of Medicaid in New York State. The Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act has been adopted, and with the re-election of our current president, it looks like that's going to remain. We also know that the population of people who need long-term services and supports is going to continue to grow at a rapid pace. And unfortunately, we also know that there's a continued push toward fiscal austerity and cuts in fundings. And that takes us to the next stage, which is the nature of change. And I think the points I'd like to make here are pretty straightforward. One, it's inevitable. It can't be avoided. It can't be stopped. It's going to happen. Secondly, however, there are some things that are universally predictable. And these are going to happen anytime you're in any type of a change situation. So the more we are aware of these and the more we factor these into the decisions we make, the easier it is for us to manage change. And then I think the third reality is that without change, we're destined to some form of decline. Well, as I thought about how do I describe the nature of change, the work of Charles Handy came to mind. And Charles Handy is another internationally respected management and organizational development consultant. I would encourage you, if you're interested in his work, to start with The Age of Paradox. And what I'm going to present today actually comes from that particular book. Charles has spent most of his career studying successful organizations and trying to determine what makes some organizations successful and what really keeps other organizations from being successful. And he looks at in particular, he looks at in very detailed way at how they deal with change. He uses a sigmoid curve to describe this. Now, a sigmoid curve is kind of a modified S-curve, and it's basically used to measure the life cycle of different things. It could be the life cycle of a hit song on the popularity charts, or it could be the life cycle of a relationship, or the life cycle of a butterfly. Well, in this particular case, he uses the sigmoid curve to describe the life cycle of an organization. And he makes the assumption that if you move in a direction up and to the right, you're making progress, you're growing and developing. What you'll notice on the left-hand side at the start of the curve is the beginning. In the beginning of any organization or any life, you'll oftentimes see a downward slope, and that is indicative of the fact that when we're first starting something, we may not do it very well, and we might actually appear to get worse at something for a while. But eventually, we'll hit a period of growth. And as we hit that period of growth, we'll start to make more progress toward the mission of the organization. And then we'll hit a period of stability where our growth has kind of leveled off. Now, it's interesting at the stability point, if we don't do anything else, we'll head into a period of decline, which is we'll now start to lose our ability to make progress, ultimately resulting in an ending. Just as a side note, one of the things I found interesting in working with other organizations is sometimes it's very difficult for an organization to say, it's time for us to lay ourselves down. There are others who can do this better. All right, so I want to take your attention now to the letter A, which is where the new curve starts. What Charles says is that the only way I continue to make progress is by doing something different, by doing something new, by going through some type of a major change. And that means that, in fact, I'm going to have to start a second sigmoid curve. As I start that second sigmoid curve, there's going to be that beginning part where there's a downward slope in our ability to make progress, but eventually I should start to see growth. Charles has found that if you make that new curve start while you're in a period of stability, it has a pretty good chance of being successful. However, if you wait until where you're at the letter B section on it and very deep in decline, it's very, very hard to make that new curve successful. So it's always better to try to make changes when you're in a very stable kind of period. Let's talk just a little bit more about this by moving to this particular slide. And this shaded area is what's known as the area where the strongest impact of change occurs. And this is the period where you're at stability and you start something new, but you really haven't started to excel at it yet. You really haven't started to see that growth phase. It's still in its infancy. Well, there's a couple things that are going to happen here. One is that you're not going to be really good at what you do yet. You will be just learning to walk. The second thing that will happen is there'll be confusion. There'll be frustration. There may even be resentment. People will want to know, well, we were doing fine with this. Why are we suddenly doing something else? And what's my role in what we're going to do? To take the analogy back to permanent white water, this is the period where you're most likely to get wet because you really haven't learned how to navigate in this new raft as well as you eventually will. And you're going to run into things. There's going to be bumps. There's going to be issues that come up, and people are going to get wet. So I can expect all of these things to happen in any kind of a change episode. What Charles Handy found out is that successful organizations repeat this cycle over and over and over again. It's the only way that they continue to make progress toward meeting the organization's mission. I want to shift gears a little bit here, and I want to talk about another thing that I think is useful. And that is the importance of knowing your distinctive or your core competence. As I've thought about this one, I thought it might be useful to use the work of Jim Collins in his Good to Great and the Social Sectors. Jim Collins and his people have been studying organizations, attempting to identify what's the difference between an organization that's good at what it does and what's an organization that really has a superior reputation. They're beyond just being good. They can actually lay claim to, we're actually great at what we do. And he came to understand that there were three things that these organizations focused on, three things that they paid a great deal of attention to. The first is what they care about, the second is what they do best, and then the third is their resources. And he recognized that when they put these three things together, they were able to identify this is the core of who and what we are. Now, Jim calls this the hedgehog concept, hedgehog being another term for a groundhog. And he indicates that this is being used because hedgehogs have piercing clarity and discipline about what they do. I actually think he's right about this. One of the things that I do for recreation is I bicycle a great deal. And one of the paths that I use in bicycling, I'll periodically pass this old, and he's now gray, groundhog on the side of the road eating fresh, moist, green clover. And I can ride 6 inches close to him, and he will not lift his head up because he is just focused on one thing and one thing only, and that is, I'm going to consume as much of this clover as I can while it's here. So I think it's actually kind of an interesting way to describe it, that you need that type of piercing clarity and discipline in terms of understanding what your real distinctive competence is. And I'd like to take a look at each of these three items individually. The first one, what we care about. Typically, organizations describe this in their mission statement, their core values, their vision, and obviously their goals. Tell me what the mission is. And if I do find somebody, or if I find two people, they're likely to state it in a different way. I think pragmatically, mission statements, core values, vision statements, and goals are important things to have. I think, unfortunately, they tend to end up dusty on a bookshelf somewhere. So I think they need to be simplified. I think this concept of what it is that we care about has to be something that every person in the organization can carry with them. It's immediately accessible to their psyche. It's immediately accessible in terms of the way they think about this is what we do. And I actually think it can be simplified, which I'm going to present next. I think simply we care about helping consumers maintain or improve their quality of life. I've worked in mental health, I've worked in drug and alcohol, I've worked in preschool daycare, I've worked in many, many different settings. And I think this holds true in every one of those settings. The reality is that we work to help people maintain or improve what they consider a quality life. Now in our field, maintenance of quality of life is even more important because we're oftentimes dealing with consumers who are at a point in their life where the likelihood that it's going to improve has diminished considerably. And we're really trying very hard just to keep it at the level that it is for as long as we can. So I think we can really simplify this. I think we can say, this is what we do. This is what we care about. Now the second one is, what do we do best? And this is where I need to ask some specific questions. What is it that makes us unique? Are there things that we do better than others do them? What are the things that we have that are special? All of this boils down to, what's our distinctive competence? Unfortunately, this can be a tough one for some organizations. My experience has been that sometimes we like to fantasize about the things that we really do well, when in fact there are others who do things better than we do. And what we're trying to find is the things that we do, we're at the top of the pack. And this requires a real open and honest assessment. We need to know what our strengths are, we need to know what our limitations are, and we need to be able to evaluate how they stack up to others. If we can identify the things that we do best, this is what makes us unique, it can be very, very helpful. And I'll give you an example using my own organization, PCMI. We were founded in 1987 by 5 area agencies on aging in the southeast region of Pennsylvania. And the purpose was so that we didn't have to duplicate efforts when it came time to train care managers. At one point, the organization spent a fair amount of time trying to have an impact on policy. And at one point, we came to the realization where we recognized that's not what we do best. There are other people who deal with policy much better than we do. We know what our competence is, and the thing that we do best, the thing that we do better than others, is we train people in the aging network because we know the aging network. Now, as we grew, we developed additional distinctive competence in being able to train others in human services. But it's been a good 18 or 19 years since we've had any forays into policy, quite simply because there are others who do that better. As Neil Lane pointed out in his white paper, the Aging Network actually does do some things really well. And I've just pulled 3 examples to show you. The first is the Aging Network has extensive experience in understanding how lower cost options work and being able to provide them. So for example, we know adult day services is less expensive than personal care. And if we can provide the kinds of service that we need to be able to provide to maintain quality of life at a day service, it makes sense to do that. And we understand that continuum of care concept. We also have an extraordinary history of using comprehensive multidisciplinary assessments. We understand that you need to assess the entire person, not just a part of the person, but the entire person. We also have experience in supporting caregivers. We know how to do that. We were some of the first people who understood the importance of caregivers. And this is going to serve us really well because we know long term if we can keep caregivers healthy, we can help contain cost of care to our consumers. So very clearly there are some things that we do really, really well. And I think once again if you read Neil's report, you'll get a handle on some of those other kinds of things. The third circle, what are our resources? And our resources extend beyond just funds. Absolutely, we need money for operations, but our resources also include personnel. Who are the people that we have on board? What's their expertise and skill level? Don't discount reputation as a resource. It's an extraordinarily valuable one. As an example of competence in aging, one of the ones that I thought about was transportation. The fact of the matter is that the Aging Network knows how to get people to adult day. They know how to get people to senior centers. They know how to get people to doctor's appointments. We even know how to get meals into consumers' homes. I think we also have extensive experience in places that other organizations may not. One example would be managing volunteer groups. The reality is that if you're going to be in the Aging Network, you're going to have to rely on volunteers for certain kinds of functions, and we know how to do that. One of the other things I would include on this list is our supporters. These are resources. Who are the people that support and legitimize what we do? These can be public figures, they can be private, they can be funders, they can also be legislators. But these are all the resources that we need to be looking at. And when we combine these, we understand that we do have a core, our distinctive competence. And the question arises, though, why does this really matter? Well, it matters for several reasons. One of which is if you go back to our whitewater example, and we're headed downstream on a new change path, and we're in that shaded area where there's going to be turmoil and things, we may end up with casualties. One of the things I find especially difficult is that in the current climate of reduced funding, so many workers are just disheartened. They're feeling like, this isn't what I signed up to do. I wanted to be able to help people, and I don't feel like I can do this. And we may lose people because of that. We may lose people because they decide that they want to do something different that's more meaningful to them personally. We may find ourselves having to make decisions about programs as well. Which are the programs that are at our core and which ones are less critical to our core? Which are the ones that we can't afford to carry? Going back to my own organization as an example, when we made the decision to focus primarily on training, it meant that there were certain things that we had to leave behind. We no longer looked for funding to develop white papers about policy. That just wasn't something that made sense for us because it was no longer at our core. And as we jettisoned those things, it allowed us really to focus on our core in a much deeper and more meaningful way. Well, as the landscape in New York changes, the reality is that you're going to need to partner with other organizations. That is, you're going to have to build relationships with organizations with which you might not currently have a relationship. And you may have to do this with people who don't know who you are and who frankly don't care who you are. The reality is that if you know your distinctive competence and your core, you have a strong tool to help make them care. And that's a large part of what folks are going to be facing. How do I make them care about what we do because I can show value in what it is that we bring to the table. Finally, it matters because you may find that you have gaps that have a negative impact on your core. For example, you might find that you've had supporters in the past who have been dormant for a while, and that gap needs to be changed. We need to reactivate that. We need to get people involved again. You may find that there are important tables at which you need a seat if you're going to be a player. So you've got to figure out, how do I get a seat at this table? Oftentimes supporters are the ways that you can do that. So it's really important that I understand, where am I focusing my energies and efforts, because I'm headed down through whitewater, we're getting terribly wet here, and we want to make sure that we don't capsize. So I've got to pay attention to the things that make the most sense to pay attention to. I would argue that you find that by understanding your distinctive competence in your core. Then you have to be extraordinarily disciplined and extremely clear about what that is. Okay, I've presented a whole lot of information, so I think now's a good time to break for questions, should we have any. And I'll wait for Ann to see.
So far, I don't have any questions other than one at the beginning about would the PowerPoint be available somewhere for printing? And it is, when we're finished, it will be available at www.agingny.org. In addition, you can find Neil Lane's white paper, if you've not read a copy of that, on the same website. It's again called The Changing Landscape of New York's Long-Term Services and Supports. It's really an excellent document to kind of begin to get your mind thinking about what might happen with all of these kind of institutional changes that are happening in New York State. Brad, as I was listening to this myself, I did have a question. This may prompt other people to write in a question. Please go to the question box if some of this has prompted questions in your mind, and write them in so that we can get Brad's input now, but we will also have a chance at the end. I have been involved with not-for-profit community-based organizations most of my career, and I'm thinking that you know, in that kind of environment, you go through with your board from time to time a look at your goals and values and mission statement sort of things as part of doing strategic planning. But in your experience in Pennsylvania, where the area agencies are part of government as they are in New York, how do you see this kind of looking at what's your sweet spot? How do you do that within a governmental structure?
You know, I think that's a good question, because I think you've now got different decision makers with oftentimes different agendas than perhaps your agency's primary mission. And I think one of the ways that you do that is you simplify things for those decision makers in terms of helping them remember that regardless of what the mission statement is, we're here to make the lives of this particular group of people better. And if we take that as the foundation, now the question becomes, how have we been most successful in doing that? And I think if you poise the question that way, in terms of what has our success been, it makes it easier for people to think about, yes, this is the path that's taking us to where we've developed competence. The reality is that sometimes you can't change their minds. One of the things I find interesting in the county that I live in is that our AAA is part of county government, and the county right now is slashing budgets because they don't want to raise taxes. And it doesn't matter terribly whether your agency has had a successful record or not. They're going to take a certain percentage of your budget away. Those kind of conversations can be difficult, but I think it's the kind of conversations that leaders have to have with those other decision makers.
We lost your audio for a minute, Brad. it's just to let you know, I think we got the idea of what you were saying. I do have a couple of questions here, or I think it's one in two parts. Do you think it's important to have each individual within a system analyze their own distinctive core competencies in addition to identify the organization as a whole? The hedgehog concept seems to be an excellent exercise to share with organizations and agencies.
Oh, I absolutely do think it's an important one. I also think it's a very difficult one for most people to do. And one of the things I have my students do on a regular basis is take the assumption if you're a professional, you need to know what you do better than anybody else does. So, for example, if somebody asks if it's time for your yearly supervisory evaluation, there shouldn't be any surprises. You should know everything before your supervisor does. You should know yourself that well. As an exercise, it's a very important exercise. It's one that probably has to be revisited more than once because people need time to season their thinking about it. I may think I'm good at something, but unless I have a chance to reflect on it and get some feedback from others, I could have a distorted view. But absolutely, I think it's an important thing to do.
And it could be part of that supervisory contact that you were mentioning as well?
Oh, absolutely. I think in good supervision, supervisors point out what people are doing really well.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? If I don't see any here, we'll go back to your presentation, and remember, we will have another opportunity at the end to do this same thing. So keep listening and write your questions anytime they occur to you, because I will be keeping track of them.
Okay, I know I'm presenting a lot of information very, very quickly. I hope it's making sense, and that takes us to one of my favorite ones, the search for meaning. This is a concept that's grown in importance to me as I've worked with a variety of people as they go through change. Change affects individuals. It affects our consumers, but it also affects organizations. And I need to understand that impact and effect that change has can't be ignored in any one of these three places. So on the individual level, I need to recognize that people are going to ask, how's this going to impact on me personally? I mean, what's my life going to be like that's different? It's something as simple as they've moved the office. Now I've got to take a whole different way to get to work. Well, that impacts on me personally. But other changes impact on us professionally. They put us in positions where we wonder, is this really what I want my profession to be? Is it consistent with what I see myself as in terms of a professional? I'm going to want to know, am I going to be required to learn new things? And if I have to learn new things, what are they? How hard are they going to be? Who's going to teach them to me? Who has responsibility for that? I'm also going to be concerned about relationships. Will I need to form new relationships? One of the things I find fascinating about work environments and work culture is that we spend a lot of time trying to create relationships that are livable for us, because for many of us, we spend more time with the folks we work with than we do with the people we live with. So anytime there's a new relationship or the possibility of multiple new relationships, I'm going to be concerned about that. What does it mean to me? What are these relationships going to be like? And last but not least, the individual needs to take a look at what's this going to mean to me in terms of what I have to do differently? Will I have to create new habits? Are you going to ask me to behave in different ways? At the consumer level, we need to look at things in terms of what are the positive possibilities. There's something I find really interesting about this, and it addresses the issue of whether change has been initiated internally or whether it's been externally imposed. My experience has been that when it's been internally initiated, we know what the positive possibilities are because we've used it as the rationale for why the change should take place. Unfortunately, my experience has also been that if the change is one that's imposed from the outside, we're more likely to have a stronger handle on the negative possibilities. We're going to be looking at the things saying, well, what are they thinking? That isn't going to work. Do they have any idea what that's actually going to do to people? Do they know what the impact is going to be? And we're going to be very, very astute at looking at the negative possibilities. I think the reality is that regardless of whether it's internal or external, I need to look at both. If it's an internal thing, we all have been trained at some point saying, I've got to look at the negative possibilities so I can try to lessen them to make sure that we figure out how to get around them. But by the same token, if it's externally imposed, I really need to spend some time taking a look at what are the positive possibilities here. And in almost every case, there will be some. The trick is making the commitment to find them so you know what they are. Once I've done that, I also need to take a look at how do I reduce the negative possibilities. That is, what can I do to lessen the impact of a negative possibility? I can't change it. It's going to happen. How do we lessen the impact? Finally, I need to take a look at what's unknown and how do we move toward knowing. There will be things we don't know how it's going to play out. Well, what are the processes we're going to put in place to make sure that we capture that so that we do know? Now, the third area that I want to look at is what's this going to mean to the organization? How will it change the organization as a whole? Are we going to need new procedures, practices, and resources? Will we have to bring new people in? Will we be letting people go? Will we be laying people off? All of those are legitimate concerns and things I need to start thinking about. What challenges will the organization face? Are we going to be facing a challenge of not having the expertise we need? Will we be facing the challenge of not having the funds that we need? But what are the challenges that this is going to create for us? At the same time, I want to look at what new opportunities might exist with this change. Once again, I encourage you to read Neil Lane's white paper because I think, as I said, he's done a very, very good job of looking downstream to tell us what's coming, and he's also done a good job of trying to look at that chaos and turmoil and say, there are some places where if we can navigate successfully, these can create new opportunities for us. Now, it's easy for me to say we need to seek meaning in all three places. The question arises, how do you do that? Well, I actually have people do it. I think this brings things into the open. I think it allows people to feel some level of control over what's happening or some level of involvement. And it also shows them a level of respect. So quite honestly, if an organization is going through a major change, I might bring all of the clerical staff together and I might say, what do you think this change is going to mean to you? Talk about it as a group and come back to me with your ideas and your thoughts about what it's going to be. Going to change. We know that what that's going to mean to you. We also need to think about what it means to our consumers. How will this have an impact on them? Excuse me. And now I'm going to do this throughout the agency from top to bottom. I'm going to do it with clerical people. I'm going to do it with care managers. I'll do it with supervisors. I'll do it with administrators. I'll do it with a board of directors. I think it's important for people to have the time to sit down and think about how will change impact us at all three different levels. Once we know this, we can be proactive in how we want to address it. The last thing I wanted to talk about today is the importance of building bridges and not fences. I've chosen two photographs that I'm not sure if they're the best ones to use, but my recent experience has told me that the one on the right, that fence with the sharp barbed wire, sometimes change can feel that way. It's also important to know that you can build bridges that have fences on them. And that was a recent experience that we've had as well, and I think it's something you really have to try to avoid because building bridges is hard enough without having fences actually built into the bridges that you have to figure out how to get across. Now, in order to talk about this in some more detail, I want to bring a little systems theory into this. we know that all organizations are systems, and we know that all associations are systems of sort, and these are artificial boundaries that we put around something saying, this is us, we are A, this is you, you are B. So I might be agency A, you might be agency B. And we know that system A brings resources in, they do things with the resources, and they create an output, they create services, they create things that help improve or maintain quality of life. Now we know that system B does the same thing, and we kind of operate autonomously. But like most systems, there are times when we break the membrane or the boundary, where system A may make a referral to system B, and then system B gives system A feedback about that referral process. So this basic notion about having boundaries is one that says that we create these kind of artificial fences around us, and we need bridges, though, because we have reason to interact with each other in some positive way. Well, with new relationships, which you're certainly going to be required to form as the landscape continues to unfold in New York, you're going to have even more boundary issues than you've had in the past. You'll have agency A, agency B, and now there's a new player on the block, agency C, and it makes things more complicated. Additionally, because of legislative requirements, these systems are being pushed together. They're being kind of merged so that there are places where we overlap one another. I think there's some useful ways to think about this that can be helpful for us. I want to use the experience we had here in Pennsylvania as a way to talk about that. There are a lot of people at the state level and with the Aging Network and with the Disability Network that are astoundingly astute professionals. These are people that I respect a great deal. They're smart, they're caring, they're skillful. Yet at the same time, I've heard them make comments that I wonder, wow, I can't believe I just heard this. And this is one of those times where you have to be willing to, as Quakers might say, speak truth to power. That is, you've got to be able to say what's really happening. So one of the things that happened here in Pennsylvania as we were working on the development of a curriculum for both aging and disability is that there were fences that were being built as bridges were being built. Now, the bridge that was first being built is that Boston University was able to get these three entities together at the same table. That was, in effect, an effort to build a bridge. Well, if you listen very quietly during break times and in the hallway, you could hear people from the Aging Network saying things like, I don't know why the state's making us do this. They're always trying to push us into something, and it just doesn't make sense. We're doing a good job with what we're doing already. And interestingly enough, you could hear people from disability saying the same kind of thing. Not to let the state out, their response to this kind of stuff was, well, if you folks would just do it the way we tell you to do it, there wouldn't be a problem. So all these things are kind of going on in the background, not in the foreground, not being openly discussed, but in the background. At the same time, we've got aging and disability who are, in effect, talking some trash about each other. Aging, on one hand, is saying, I don't get it. Disability is only 15% of the population served. I wish we had the resources we did. I don't understand how they get so much of what they want and we don't. On the other side, you had disability saying things like, these people in aging are just so condescending and patronizing. They treat their consumers like they're infants. They don't treat them with respect. So you had all of these kinds of conversations that were taking place in the background. And in effect, what they were doing is they were building fences. It was very hard for somebody from aging to really understand what the disability system was and how they might partner with them, as long as they continued to hold those kind of attitudes and not be willing to find a way to vest themselves, to divest themselves of those, to get rid of those kinds of attitudes. Well, an interesting thing happened as we were involved in this joint training and as we decided to speak truth to power or to tell the emperor when they weren't wearing clothes or risk saying some of these things out loud. More fences got built for a short while. People were defensive, but eventually those fences started to come down, and people began to recognize that there were more commonalities than there were differences. There were more reasons for them to collaborate than there was to battle over turfs and territories. They also came to understand that some of those differences were real and that they were there for very, very good reasons. I want to give you one example of that, and it has to do with the difference between aging and disability related to cognitive capacity. And it's a primary example that got fleshed out as people began to say, we need to stop building fences. Automatically check for cognitive capacity, because we have experience that tells us that the older one gets and the more frail one gets, the higher the probability that there could be some level of cognitive impairment. So there's a reason for us to do that. Now, we also understand cognitive capacity as on a continuum. It's not you're either or. It's I might be fully able to make good decisions about one thing but not another. So, for example, I might say I want my bills paid on time, but I no longer have the capacity to write checks. Well, so we understand cognitive capacity in that light, and there's a reason for us to check it so that we can make sure that people are making good decisions for them. And we honor autonomy. We do it in a different way. Well, on disability, though, they automatically do just the opposite. They don't check for capacity, and there's a reason for that. They have a history of people assuming that folks with disabilities couldn't make decisions, and there was huge discriminations and injustice. For them, this is a civil rights issue. Yes, I have cognitive capacity. I'm paralyzed. I'm not demented. So those differences are real, and they're there for a reason. As we come to understand those, we come to understand that we still have one thing in common, and that is we're working to maintain or improve quality of life. One of the things that's going to happen is that your territory is going to get much more complicated. I mean, you've got Disability AERC, you've got New York Connects, you've got managed care organizations, you've got certified home health agencies, you've got AAAs, you've got Medicaid managed care. I mean, you've just got health benefit exchange, so many different places that are being pushed together in the changes that you're looking at, that you're really going to have to spend some serious effort in learning to build bridges and not fences. I don't know if you're familiar with the zero-sum game. I've put that in there to remind myself to say something about that. Basically, the zero-sum game is a game that's played by people who teach managers about how to lead organizations related to power and how power gets used. And one of the things that the zero-sum game has shown is that if you treat me in a certain way, well, you can expect that I'm going to treat you that way. So, in effect, if you compete with me, well, I'm going to compete with you, because if I don't, I lose. If you compete and I don't compete, you get the advantage. If you cooperate with me, however, and I cooperate with you, we both win. And what the research has shown is that the cooperation piece is the one that gets ignored the most, yet it works the same way. If organizations come to understand that you respect and honor what they do, and you hold your head high and demand respect and honor for what you do with the willingness to collaborate and cooperate, the likelihood that they'll respond in the same way goes up. And I think this is an extremely important concept to remember. All right, so it's a quick review. It's important to understand your environment, to understand that it's moving very, very quickly. People are going to get wet. To understand that it's very complex with lots of players. That can be confusing, but it also creates opportunities. To understand the nature of change itself. It's going to occur, you can't stop it. And when it does, there's going to be unavoidable periods of confusion, stress, frustration, mistakes, and loss. Your job is to manage your way to periods of growth as quickly as possible. To know what your core is, to be honest and accurate about that. To focus on the core and keep this simple, to help people find meaning in all different levels, for themselves, for consumers, for the organizations, and last but not least, to build bridges, not fences. So I've gone over a few minutes, and I wanted to make sure that we gave you a chance to ask additional questions, so I apologize that I've run a little bit late, and I guess now's a good time to see if there are additional questions.
Thank you. Actually, we have this scheduled to go until 2:30, so we have time for any additional questions that people might have. There's a question here. What if someone competes with you and you attempt to engage and build in following the zero game concept? Does the organization suffer because of survival of the fittest?
I think that's, yeah, I fully understand that question. I think that's a mindset that takes a certain amount of recognition that you will get wet as you navigate this stuff. There will be times when you won't be able to keep everything nice, neat, clean, and dry. And I can give you an example from my own organization's experience. We provide training and consultation to the Aging Network, and we've been doing it since 1988. And we've actually, not only in Pennsylvania, we've done work in New Jersey and some limited work in Delaware and Ohio as well. Recently, the Commonwealth decided that they were going to establish the Long-Term Living Training Institute. And in effect, the Long-Term Training Institute is doing what we're doing. My board of directors talked about that and said, we can compete with them, in which case we're likely to lose because they're going to have much more money, much more resource, and they've got the state behind them saying, this is the organization we've started. Partner with them around that distinctive competence, and that's what we've done. And it's been successful so far. We've been able to come in and do the things that they couldn't do. But it did require that we were really, really honest with ourselves about what we could and couldn't do. Now, with that said, will you run into individual leaders or individual organizations that are going to be extraordinarily aggressive and who don't even recognize attempts to partner, or if they do recognize an attempt to partner, their immediate inclination is to exploit? Yes, you will. And that's why it's important to get yourself invited to as many tables as you can where there are decision makers. It's also why it's important to reactivate and make sure that you understand who your supporters are or who are the kind of supporters that you need to build. I might not be able to influence person A, but I can influence somebody who can influence person A. That goes back to the issue of complexity. There's more than one way to influence that organization or group, and I need to start thinking that way. If they're not going to partner with us straight up, who can bring pressure to bear on that situation that can be a useful tool? What's the detour that I have to take to make that happen?
This is Ann. I think to add to your answer here and perhaps to the question, you also comes back to having to know what your core competencies are and where to push that envelope if you're finding a competitor there and you need to try to find your place there. Is that fair to say?
I think it is. I think it's also important. How do I want to say this? My experience has been that sometimes people aren't listening well enough to actually hear what your competency is or how it will benefit them. So if I can somehow make that easier for them to hear or to see, we've done that at times by giving our service away, where we've said, we'll show you what we mean, it's not going to cost you anything. And it was a risk in terms of an investment. It might pay off, it might not pay off. But I think sometimes you do push the envelope. Let me back this up a bit. First, by recognizing realistically what you can do better. If, for example, I'm going to go up against a managed care organization that's part of a larger healthcare system, there are some things I can't do as well as them, and I need to recognize that, I need to honor that, and I need to honor it publicly to them so that they know I'm not a battler. They know that I'm not an immediate threat to them. As soon as I put myself out there as a threat, as soon as I build a fence, I'm bringing all of their forces focused on eliminating me, and I really don't want to do that. Rather, what I want to do is try to find, even if it's a backdoor, a way to show them, we know something about these neighborhoods that you don't know. We have reputation there. We have value added if we partner on these kinds of things.
Or experience in partnering. I think one of the things that the Aging Network has is a lot of experience in networking, and
we have trust and reputation. People know who we are. They know that we're safe. Yeah.
Are there any other questions that anybody has? I see one additional one here talking about if this will be available afterwards as a PowerPoint, and we have, I'll just remind you that a recording of this webinar plus the PowerPoint will be available when we finish today at www.agingnewyork.org. So you can find the information and the wonderful graphics that Brad has brought us today there to share with people if you'd like, or just to remind yourself about what happened today. Brad has put up a screen here that tells you how you can get to him and also find out more about his organization. And they will be presenting the next two webinars that we have scheduled for the rest of December. So this Friday, we will have Frank Wartz back with us talking about time management. We did stress management last week. Now that we're getting closer to the holidays, we want to talk about time management. And then our last one will be a week from today on the 17th, where Brad will be back with us talking about person-centered planning. And I think that it builds on some of the things that he talked about earlier in his conversation, that is a place where we may have expertise where other people don't, because we do case management in kind of a different way than disability community or the traditional health home care agencies, and we're intersecting with all of those organizations at this whitewater time and the existence of human service or health and human service providers. So I want to thank Brad very much for this really thought-provoking presentation today. And I also want to thank Karen Thornton here at the New York State Association of Area Agencies on Aging. She's our technical support and makes all of this happen seemingly very easy. We also want to apologize for the fact that we lost Brad's audio from time to time, and we will be looking at how we can make that not be a feature of our next webinar presentation. And I want to thank all of you for having joined us and ask you to just stay on this website for a few moments afterwards, because there'll be a survey that will pop up. And it's very helpful for us to know your input and feedback so that we know what we're doing well and what you would like us to be doing in the future. So if you would stay connected to our website and fill out that questionnaire, that would be most helpful to us. With that, I think we'll close our webinar today, and thank you very much for spending part of your Monday afternoon with us.